I'm Roger Baker, Executive Director of the Stratfor Center for Applied Geopolitics at RANE, a global center of excellence for geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Learn how you can put geopolitics to work for your organization at ranenetwork.com.
Welcome to RANE's Essential Geopolitics podcast. On October 4th, Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party held a leadership election that resulted in conservative candidate and former economic security minister Sanae Takaichi winning, which would clear the way for her to become Japan's next prime minister after a diet vote tentatively scheduled for October 15th. Chase Blazek, RANE's Asia-Pacific analyst, is here on the podcast to help unpack the results of the election and explore what this means for the country going forward. Hey, Chase, welcome back.
Hey, Emma. Good to be back.
If you want to start off by kind of just going over the details of the election, Japan had this party leadership election on the 4th. What's significant about the timing of this election, and what are the major were the major political factors that led to this outcome with conservative candidate Takaichi coming out on top?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start very briefly back. But the LDPs, they've got long-term electoral struggles. Japan is aging, and so is their electoral base. But most recently, in the last 2 years, they've had this thing called a slush fund scandal, implicated a lot of LDP lawmakers, and the public was quite upset about this. And the LDP only ever really enacted half measures to try and fix it, so to speak, and the public was never quite satisfied. So in more recent parliamentary elections, in particular the October 2024 lower house elections and the July 2025 upper house elections, the LDP got trounced in both of them. They lost their majority, which is not common. The LDP has ruled Japan with only two very brief periods of exception since World War II. So they're quite dominant. So for them to lose a majority in both houses is a big deal. Nonetheless, they still held a minority government, meaning the LDP plus Komeito, are still able to run the government. They still appoint or have their cabinet members in place. But every time they want to pass a policy, they have to get the permission or the approval of at least one or two opposition parties. And this dynamic for current Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba just became untenable. There was a lot of pushback from within his own party, especially from conservatives in the LDP, who do not like Ishiba, and Taro Aso, senior elder of the LDP in particular, despises Ishiba. He has some personal beef with him, and they took this as an opportunity, saying, look, the guy can't lead us clearly, we need to get someone new. And the pressure became so great that Ishiba in early September announced he was going to resign, triggering this election process. And then a month later, we have Takaichi winning that election. But if you look in the election itself, you can see very clearly this split between reformers and conservatives. Because at the end of the day, this was Takaichi's victory, rather, was an instance of a split party vote, because the reformers had two fairly strong candidates, current agricultural minister Shinjiro Koizumi and then chief cabinet secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi, and they were both pretty strong, whereas Takaichi did not really have a lot of strong conservative contenders. They performed very poorly in the first round of this two-round election. And so what that meant was Takaichi's numbers looked a lot better because she had all the conservative votes concentrated under her, and she ended up winning. The problem with this is she's viewing this as a clear mandate to be like, great, I'm going to turn the LDP hard conservative. Clearly the public supports me, which, as I just stated, I think is an overstatement of the results of the election. And now she's going forward with this very conservative leadership crew that she has appointed to the LDP to try and become prime minister at the next extraordinary diet session vote sometime here in the second half of October.
Can you talk about the potential domestic impacts of the election outcome?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we don't know if she's going to actually lead. And that's one of the problems here that we have to start with before we get into sort of like the policy nuts and bolts. is usually it's a foregone conclusion that because of the LDP's traditional political dominance, whoever wins the LDP presidential election, of course, will become prime minister. And going into this election, this was generally thought to be the case as well. But since October 4th, just 5 days ago, traditional LDP coalition partner Komeito has come out saying, yeah, we've got some real problems with Takeichi's conservative policies, and we want some assurances that she's going to take our views into account before we agree to renew this coalition, which is not common. Usually, Komeito has been such a strong coalition partner with the LDP since the late 90s that whoever wins the LDP race, Komeito just gives their de facto stamp of approval. They don't really think about it too much, and this person becomes the prime minister. Now, with Komeito saying, I don't know about this, it's not a foregone conclusion. Takeichi actually gets to rule. So she could leave, or rather, Komeito could leave, depriving Takeichi of her one coalition partner. And there's also, alongside all of this, the LDP trying to wrangle another coalition partner or another partner into the coalition because they want to not be, Takeichi and her government want to not be in the minority anymore in the Diet, which means they have to bring on side at least one conservative opposition party. But those parties have their own desires for how they want to approach spending, national defense, whether or not they want to actually be a part of an LDP government if Komeito is leaving. So these are all sort of the dynamics that between now and whenever the Diet holds its extraordinary session to vote for the prime minister, this could preempt any discussions we may have on policy because Takeichi might not even be in at the end of the day.
Can you speak at all to, I guess, what you think are the likely scenarios in terms of how the elections end up playing out, or when or if they end up happening?
So the vote in the Diet for a prime minister will definitely happen. At this point, it's procedurally mandated. You have to know who's going to be the next prime minister because Ishiba is going to step down pretty soon here. The problem is we don't know when at this point. I think it probably will happen by the time October is over, at the very latest in early November, but probably here in the next couple of weeks. This upcoming vote is less certain than it usually is for the LDP president that they will become prime minister. So there's a lower chance, 30 to 40%, that she does not become prime minister, or that she becomes prime minister, but with still a minority government, meaning either Komeito sticks with her, but the LDP can't get another coalition partner, or Komeito leaves her and another coalition partner comes on, but that's still not enough votes for her to have majority government. And then there's a possibility that she's out altogether, and the very ideologically disunited opposition parties field their own prime minister. I'll start with the most likely case. If Takeichi does indeed come into office, she's appointed a very conservative crew around her. She is rejected the possibility of including a lot of reformers in her cabinet, which would have been something you do if you want to sort of heal the rifts within the LDP. So there'll be a lot of internal strife within the LDP going forward still after this election. Also, the key issues that the LDP has faced this whole time, like the slush fund scandal, Takeichi really wants to bury those and doesn't want to address them anymore because in her mind, this has been overblown, this is killing the party, and it's just in general bad vibes. So they don't want to address this issue, whereas the public at large seem to think if the LDP doesn't address the slush fund issue, they'll just decrease support for them even more. Outside of sort of like the political developments here, as far as like Takeichi managing the LDP, her policies are also going to be pretty conservative. She's quite socially conservative, which will limit the LDP's appeal to a lot of young folks. On economic policy, she wants to spend quite a bit more than Ishiba did, have loose fiscal policy, and if she can have any say in it, loose monetary policy, although that depends much upon what the Bank of Japan wants to do, and it's a fairly independent institution. But suffice to say, she wants to sort of spend her way out of Japan's current economic troubles. And those are especially troubles with people being concerned about the affordability of common goods, about their wages not rising fast enough to catch up with inflation. those sorts of things. So she wants to spend quite a bit. And in the short term, this could boost growth, boost Japan's economic growth. But in the long term, it raises debt concerns. It would also raise inflation in general. If you send out more money into the economy, into people's pockets, that raises inflation and just kicks the can down the road on addressing cost of living issues in Japan. That's the domestic part. Sorry, I'll go ahead and stop if you had a question about that.
Do you want to briefly discuss the lower likelihood scenario of the opposition government electing a prime minister for Japan?
Yeah, we've only seen two of these periods, like I said, since World War II. One in the 90s and one in the late 2000s, if I recall correctly. And they were both characterized by very fractious and unproductive governments. So a lot of prime ministers sort of coming in and going, and the opposition parties not being able to agree on anything because Japan's opposition is very ideologically diverse. They span from the far left to the far right, and you'd have to get at least three, sometimes four, of these parties to challenge the LDP with minority government. If they wanted to have a majority government, they'd have to have even more of these opposition parties together. So rather than dig into each of the particular policies they could get into, suffice to say, an opposition government would struggle to be anything except well, at least we're not Takaichi government. So they'd get in, say, thank goodness we dodged that bullet, and then not be able to get much done because they're too busy arguing with one another.
If we're going back to a potential Takaichi government, what would the foreign impacts be of her leadership?
Yeah, the first one that I think is most interesting from a regional relations perspective is her nationalism. She tends to be fairly unapologetic about Japan's World War II era war crimes and its legacy there, saying, it wasn't actually that big a deal, that sort of thing. And they seem rhetorical and sort of, maybe in bad taste, but not exactly a big deal in the West. But in Japan and in South Korea and China, those are major accusations, major allegations to say it wasn't that big a deal to do these things in World War II. And so that could really harm relations with China and South Korea. And with China in the past, this could hurt, economic ties. With China canceling any sort of trade delegations or efforts to expand trade and investment with Japan, saying basically until Takaichi gets her nationalism under check, we don't really want to have much to do with her because she's hurting the feelings of the Chinese people or some other euphemisms. And with South Korea, they've long had economic ties with Japan as well, but the security ties of late are the most interesting and the most new development because of this historical baggage that South Korea and Japan have with one another. They've tended to struggle to cooperate on security, even though they both have similar defense concerns. They're both concerned about the rise of China. They're both concerned about conventional and nuclear missile threats from North Korea, but they haven't been able to get over their historical and cultural baggage with one another. That has changed as of the last year or two, with both of the previous leaders, Yoon Suk-yeol in South Korea, and then Shigeru Ishiba, and before him, Fumio Kishida in Japan, both saying, well, we agree not to inflame these past issues, and let's try and use this as momentum to push forward with security cooperation. And they have done so between themselves and the United States in trilateral cooperation, including on tracking North Korean missile threats, because they all sort of have different pieces of the surveillance jigsaw puzzle with North Korea. And when they get together, they can track these threats better, respond better, that sort of thing. So if Takaichi does adopt this sort of nationalism, we can expect that security cooperation to either slow or perhaps suspend altogether, because even though strategically both sides value the security cooperation, these historical issues are too big to overcome usually for any politician in South Korea to just look aside, as Takaichi would say, and do the sorts of things that tend to get their hackles up. Foreign policy-wise, there's also the U.S. relationship to look at. No matter what government comes into power, the U.S. is critical. It's the most important relationship Japan has. And so Takaichi, like anybody else, will emphasize a strong U.S. security partnership. She also is considering and will likely appoint Toshimitsu Motegi as her foreign minister. Motegi negotiated with the Trump team or as Japan's envoy with the Trump team in Trump's first term on their trade talks. So he would be a great person to sort of pick the ball up where it was last time and say, hey, I've done this before. I can help us, bridge our disagreements on how much Japan's going to invest in the United States, and on any sorts of import barriers we have to reduce the possibility in the future of more U.S. tariffs on Japan.
Do you think that she's likely to be successful in that, or do you think that despite having a more prioritization of Japan-U.S. relations, that might not move the needle?
In the U.S.-Japan trade deal, sort of finalizing this, it's uncertain at this point. Takaichi is also wanting to get the LDP back to its conservative roots, and that includes sort of rural support roots and industrial manufacturing support roots. And so a lot of what the outgoing government, Ishiba's government, have agreed to is to reduce import restrictions to U.S. goods, something that was very important to the Trump administration. And if Takaichi wishes to appeal to her base, especially her agricultural base, she might not be able to fulfill those promises. So although she and her team might be a more amenable and ideologically aligned interlocutor with the Trump administration, some of these import details that have tie-ins with the LDP's electoral base could get her in trouble or get Japan in trouble if they decide to change the script and say, well, I know my predecessor agreed to do this with you, the United States, but I don't actually want to do this. Let's try and renegotiate. Renegotiations don't tend to go so well with the Trump administration. They tend to view this as affronts. So to be determined there.
Mm. And before we end, do you want to just talk about Japan's other neighbor, Russia, and what ties with Russia or that relationship will look like with Takaichi if she is to become prime minister?
Yeah, this is also a bit uncertain because Takaichi views herself as a disciple of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who for much of his long tenure tried to improve relations with Russia. So she's got a predilection toward, ideologically, to do the same, sort of say, Japan doesn't need to have 10 different enemies in the Pacific. Let's just focus on China and focus on North Korea and see if we can improve relations with Russia, or at least that's what her political origins in the Abe faction or with Abe level folks would suggest. However, she's been quite vocal in the last year that as long as Russia's invasion of Ukraine keeps up, that is going to severely impede Russia-Japan relations. So as long as the Ukraine war continues, that sort of practical Japan take on Russia, let's try and improve relations, that'll have to be on the back burner because it's untenable for Takaichi amid the Ukraine war to warm ties with Russia.
And that's a whole nother podcast episode.
Yes, it is.
Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, except for to say that this is moving rapidly, so I imagine we'll have plenty of fodder for another podcast if we wanted to in just the next month alone.
Yeah, I'm sure a follow-up podcast would be great for our listeners to have, as I'm sure they're watching this closely as well. But it's been great speaking with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Same.
You can read more of Chase's analyses on this topic and others on our Risk Intelligence platform. You can also sign up to receive our complimentary Risk News and Analysis Digest, Risk Book. Simply register on our website, ranenetwork.com, to receive this intel directly to your inbox every weekday morning. We've also included the link to subscribe in the description of this episode. As always, thanks for joining us.